Okay, let's just dive right in. Welcome to another explainer. Today, we're putting on our historian hats and conducting an official audit of, well, a totally catastrophic administrative breakdown. If you know anything about the 72 demons of Solomon, you already know the big names, right? The kings, the princes, the whole C-suite of the underworld. But today, we're actually ignoring their grand speeches. We're looking at a massive system failure. We're zooming in on the exact moment the internal power dynamics of hell completely went off the rails.
Because the primary source document leaves us with a wild core mystery. What actually happens when the massive, crumbling factory floor of the underworld simply stops taking orders? Seriously, think of this as a tense political thriller. The high-ranked demons are up in the boardroom, locked in this massive ego trip argument over who's really in charge, totally ignoring the workforce. As we'll see in this explainer, when management blatantly ignores the staff, it leads to absolute systemic paralysis. So here's our agenda for this post-mortem report. We're looking at 1. The kings ignore the floor. 2. Middle management asks why. 3. The true cost of war. 4. The factory floor awakens. 5. Bael's disastrous company memo. And finally, 6. The vertical labor strike. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. The kings ignore the floor. You know, systemic inequality here was just off the charts. The high-ranked kings, guys like Bael, Paimon, and Belial, were completely obsessed with order, inheritance, and their own divine injuries. They treated the entire realm like their personal boardroom, where only their voices mattered. But down on the factory floor, the reality for the working class lesser banners was brutal. I mean, they're the ones who actually have to carry the dead, rebuild the ruined gates, and literally bleed for these crowns. The C-suite was up there arguing over who gets to wear the shiniest hat, completely forgetting the people who actually have to polish it. And the immediate fallout? Absolutely disastrous. Our source text points out that the silence following the king's argument wasn't peace. No, it was an infection. It seeped downward into the ash courts and the workshops, places those high-ranked spirits literally never visited. The kings really thought this argument was an exclusive closed-door meeting, but the lower ranks, they were listening. And the very first whisper of this uprising started with one simple, highly logical question. Why do the lesser banners have to die just to prove which crown is the brightest? Which brings us to Section 2. Middle management asks why. Now, these aren't just arbitrary, spooky titles, okay? These are highly specific functional management roles. The presidents, they manage systems and moral philosophy. The Earls are essentially your accountants, handling the treasuries and the actual consequences of actions. Dukes manage infrastructure, craft, and travel, while the Marquises handle borders and legalities. These are the mid-level managers who actually keep the lights on in the Dominion. And suddenly, it clicks for them. They're just being used as tools, passed around from one king to another. They understand how this crumbling factory works, and if the C-suite wants a war, well, middle management is going to start auditing the machinery of that war. Marquis Ronove perfectly gave a sort of grammar to this brewing rebellion. He said, if rank is a language, then duty is its meaning. Remove duty, and the title becomes noise. He basically called it an issue of syntax. The kings kept issuing all these grand declarations, but they were like sentences missing subjects. They demand an army march, but never actually name who had to go down and explain to a shattered legion that glory had just eaten their brothers again. It's this profound, earth-shattering realization of worker value. Let's move to Section 3, the true cost of war. So the craftsmen and the accountants get together and lay out some intensely practical concerns. Raum talks about stolen treasures and ruined dignities, noting that, pride usually starts by calling destruction repair. Halphas points out that weapons wait far more patiently than wisdom ever does. And then Vapula, speaking for the actual craftsmen, drops a massive truth bomb. Armies get remembered for the battles, sure, but civilizations only survive because the builders actually come back to rebuild after the flames. War destroys infrastructure. These dukes and earls didn't care who was going to win this boardroom squabble. They wanted to know who was going to clean up the colossal mess. Enter Furcas, the lone knight among the 72. He actually showed up late to the assembly, basically refusing to step into a room where everyone else was secretly calculating how to survive. Furcas could not care less about royal emblems. His specialty is the hard science of seeing right through pretense, and he was about to deliver a seriously harsh lesson in logic to this entire brewing rebellion. Furcas drops this completely devastating line on the assembly. A blade does not escape guilt because a hand directed it. Think about why that matters for a second. This triggered a massive psychological shift on the factory floor. It moved them completely away from blind, unquestioning loyalty. Furcas is warning the lower ranks that if you just blindly obey the kings, you aren't just a victim, you're an accomplice. Obedience without self-command is just decoration.
Moving right along, Section 4. The factory floor awakens.
Okay, so without asking for permission from anyone, these entirely unrecorded bodies, the grunt soldiers, the laborers who don't have famous seals or titles carved into occult history, they just start gathering. They're meeting around forge pits, broken causeways, storehouses full of weapons that haven't been sent out yet. And for the very first time, they start speaking across banners. Because the reality is, without them, the kings are literally just voices echoing around in decorated empty halls. And wow, these working legions start asking some incredibly practical, highly dangerous questions. Like, did the first king ever actually bother to learn the name of a single soldier below the third circle? Does Bael actually respect us, or does he just understand our price better than he understands loyalty? And why didn't Paimon step in and stop this executive infighting before it ruined everything? As our source points out, practical questions like these are the absolute enemy of ceremonial lies. The C-suite's illusion of ultimate authority was totally, completely shattering. That brings us to Section 5, Bael's disastrous company memo. So Bael, the first king, gets wind of this and issues a proclamation. And honestly, it's the most toxic, realm-wide company memo you could possibly imagine. He declares that just questioning the rightful order is flat-out rebellion, and it hinges on this incredibly arrogant line: the first does not explain itself to those counted after. Bael doesn't just refuse to answer the floor's questions, he turns the very act of asking into a massive insult. He made doubt a battlefield. It's the ultimate because I said so from a terrible boss, and it pretty much guaranteed a full-blown crisis. Meanwhile, the rest of the board is panicking, but in vastly different ways. Paimon goes into full HR mode. He argues that the lower ranks actually need to be heard to maintain trust. He knows that a legion obeying strictly out of fear will eventually just start counting the exit doors. Belial, on the other hand, just wants to throw cash at the problem. He proposes bribes, fancy new titles, special exemptions. Paimon calls it bribery, Belial calls it civilization. But notice something, neither of them actually cared about the workers' duty. They just wanted the factory running again, no matter what it took. And here's the climax, Section 6, the vertical labor strike. The first actual strike action didn't come from some famous named spirit. It came from an unnamed captain commanding 49 lesser soldiers. He got an order to hold a gate for Bael, but instead of just doing it, he asked a series of highly logical questions about who exactly counted as an enemy in this scenario. And when literally no one could give him a straight answer, he placed the written order face down and just refused. He told them, "We'll guard the gate against violence, sure, but not against questions." The escalation from that point was incredibly rapid. It was a system-wide shutdown, triggered by one single act of middle management defiance. First, that captain refuses in a logical order. By the very next morning, 7 other gates had adopted his exact same wording. And by the watch after that, something truly amazing happened. Armories started reporting missing locks. Not missing weapons, missing locks. The craftsmen literally removed the ability of high command to seal soldiers into decisions that were made way above their pay grade. The factory floor was actively dismantling management's leverage in real time. All of this culminated in what became known as the Lower Covenant. Now, this wasn't a violent, bloody rebellion where they stormed the C-suite with pitchforks. No, it was a formal unionization. The ranks simply crossed their arms and refused to process orders or design engines of conflict without open, transparent accounting. This conflict ran all the way from the highest crown straight down to the unnamed hands working at the gatehouse. To define it clearly, the Lower Covenant was an agreement across the mid and lower demonic ranks to simply refuse orders that lacked cause, ensuring that no spirit could hide cowardice inside blind obedience. The Marquises wouldn't ignite border wars without a valid reason. The presidents wouldn't design conflict engines without balancing the books. It was just a brilliant, beautiful piece of workforce solidarity that completely paralyzed the king's ability to wage their vanity war. They didn't raise a rebel flag. They raised a question. What is rank actually for? We're going to leave you with this final, honestly haunting note from the Earl Andromalius. He wrote, "The first theft in any empire is not gold. It is the theft of the right to ask why." What you really should take away from this historical audit is that when management steals the right to ask why, a rebellion of memory and logic is absolutely inevitable. The lower ranks didn't choose violence, they chose memory. And armed with questions, they became a territory no king could ever easily conquer. So I leave you with this thought to mull over. In your own organizations, whether at work or elsewhere, are you just demanding silence, or are you actually earning duty? Think about it. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember, always keep asking questions.